This is Power Hour with Gabriella Power.
Hello and welcome to Power Hour. I'm Gabriella Power. Thank you for joining us. Marco Rubio is an absolute star. The Secretary of State delivered a brilliant speech at the Munich Security Conference. It was warm, it was friendly, but there was a lot of tough love in his speech. While he was calling to revitalise an old friendship and renew the greatest civilization in human history, he clearly spelled out the dire consequences of mass migration and how it is failing the West.
In pursuit of a world without borders, we opened our doors to an unprecedented wave of mass migration that threatens the cohesion of our societies, the continuity of our culture, and the future of our people. We made these mistakes together.
He also noted the failures of the UN, criticising how it has played virtually no role in resolving current conflicts.
The United Nations still has tremendous potential to be a tool for good in the world. But we cannot ignore that today, on the most pressing matters before us, it has no answers and has played virtually no role. It could not solve the war in Gaza. Instead, it was American leadership that freed captives from barbarians and brought about a fragile truce. It has not solved the war in Ukraine. It took American leadership in partnership with many of the countries here today just to bring the two sides to the table in search of a still elusive peace. It was powerless to constrain the nuclear program of radical Shia clerics in Tehran. That required 14 bombs dropped with precision from American B-2 bombers. And it was unable to address the threat to our security from a narco-terrorist dictator in Venezuela. Instead, it took American special forces to bring this fugitive to justice.
Rubio also brilliantly articulated the importance of defending Western civilization, highlighting the deep bonds that America, Europe and Britain share, forged by shared history, faith, culture, heritage, language, and the sacrifices that have been made, and why we must defend our way of life.
The fundamental question we must answer at the outset is, what exactly are we defending? Because armies do not fight for abstractions. Armies fight for a people. Armies fight for a nation. Armies fight for a way of life. And that is what we are defending. A great civilization that has every reason to be proud of its history.
He received a standing ovation for his speech, and he finished with a promise of a bright future ahead. We will be diving into all of this with Hilary Fordwich in a moment, and also looking at AOC's embarrassing reaction as she attempted to mock Marco Rubio. Spoiler alert, it has spectacularly backfired. She is exposed, actually, for not knowing her history or geography. Also later in the show, Stephen A. Smith says that he's considering a 2028 run. We'll speak to Adam Crichton about that. And Macron's government is being slammed for the letter it has sent to young people. We'll be joined by Angela Mollard for all those details, as well as the growing calls for Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor's time as trade envoy to be investigated for possible corruption. Joining us now is Hilary Fordwich, President and founder of Strelmark. Hilary, it's great to see you again. We saw Secretary of State Marco Rubio receiving a standing ovation for his brilliant speech in Munich. It was, of course, warm. He was emphasising the shared history between Europe and the US, and he also warned of the dangers of mass migration and not standing by as Western civilization declines.
And this is why we do not want our allies to be weak, because that makes us weaker. We want allies who can defend themselves so that no adversary will ever be tempted to test our collective strength. This is why we do not want our allies to be shackled by guilt and shame. We want allies who are proud of their culture and of their heritage, who understand that we are heirs to the same great and noble civilization, and who together with us are willing and able to defend it. And this is why we do not want allies to rationalize the broken status quo rather than reckon with what is necessary to fix it. For we in America have no interest in being polite and orderly caretakers of the West's managed decline.
Hilary, can I get your thoughts? What did you make of Rubio's speech there?
Well, thank you for having me back again. Always a pleasure, Gabriella. I actually saw it live, and you were correct. On the one hand, yes, there was an standing ovation at the end. However, it was, I would call it a reluctant standing ovation by many. Because what happened? Because what happened was some jumped and literally leapt to their feet. Others began to stand, and it's sort of that being guilted into it thing. There you go. You're seeing it now. The audience is seeing it. Then
One
they
by one.
gradually. Yes, exactly. So I wouldn't call it a resounding endorsement because some people obviously took umbrage at some of the things he said. One of the other things I thought was very interesting that he said, we didn't have a chance to play it there, was when he said that the US, America, will always be a child of Europe. Now that received an immediate applause from the entire audience. Maybe because they took it as, oh, you're like our little baby. But he said it in a way, given the entire context of his speech, Gabriella, which was, I've always said, you give me a naughty, misbehaved, bad child, and I'll give you a weak, lousy parent. I think he was saying, we're strong. We expect you to be all you were. And so I think the message overall was, be all you used to be. That's what he was really saying over the entire speech. I think it was a wonderful message. It was extremely articulate. It was strong, and yet it was not overbearing or aggressive, which was a fine line to walk. And last but not least, I think that this will go down in history as a line in the sand. Of course, he has the support of, and this came at the directive of President Trump, but I think this was a very presidential speech by Marco Rubio on the world stage, and it set the course for human history and the West going forward.
I think you're right. I mean, he would be a great nominee in 2028. Of course, meanwhile, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, has made an absolute fool of herself as she desperately tried to criticise Marco Rubio's brilliant speech. Let's just listen to her first blunder.
Was a pure appeal to Western culture. My favorite part was when he said that American cowboys came from Spain.
I thought they came from Winnetou, but
I believe the Mexicans and descendants of African enslaved peoples would like to have a word on that.
Hillary AOC has been community noted on social media. Plenty of people calling her out that cowboys can be traced back to Spain, Hillary.
Oh, yes, they absolutely can. And I thought it was very interesting the way we went from one end of the spectrum, which was an articulate, brilliant speech, to somebody who basically always delivers a word salad. And she was incorrect there, yes, because, and even, don't forget when she talks about Mexicans, where do most of the Mexicans come from? Lots of them came from descendants of Spain. And so I think she's absolutely correct. Actually, an interesting factoid, during the heyday of the Hollywood cinematography of all of the cowboy movies, because of the strong union in California, a lot of the Western movies were actually filmed in the plains of Spain as well. So when you think you're seeing the West, you're actually seeing the plains of Spain.
Well, here's AOC again, embarrassing herself once more, arguing against the successful capture of Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro before accidentally admitting that she has no idea where Venezuela is on a map. Listen to this.
We look at what happened in Venezuela, for example. It is not a it is not a remark on who Maduro was as a leader. He canceled elections. He was an anti-democratic leader. That doesn't mean that we can kidnap a head of state and engage in acts of war just because the nation is below the equator. And
Hillary, it wasn't really a great argument even before she let it slip that she had no idea where Venezuela is.
Yeah, I suggest that she actually goes and takes some geography lessons, particularly if she's on the world stage. She was also asked a question with regard to Thailand, and basically her answer was oh no, sorry, Taiwan, Taiwan, and basically she said there's a long, complicated history there. So I think what's a very important point to remember, she's a Democrat. She, with many other Democrats, got on a bus and left Capitol Hill when we're heading into a shutdown, Gabriella? What on earth is she doing over there? She doesn't know her geography. She doesn't know about what's happening in Taiwan. She couldn't answer those questions. She isn't a world leader. She isn't there on any authority or any budget. What on earth was she doing? She's making, obviously, for sound bites that actually came out not in her favor.
Yep, she's just there embarrassing herself on the world stage. Also at the Munich Security Conference, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton became very, very uncomfortable being called out for her severe Trump derangement syndrome. It was interesting that she actually admitted that mass migration has been destabilising to the US, which is, you know, it's somehow not offensive when she states the obvious. But Hillary Clinton ended up ranting about just how much she hates Donald Trump and gets called out for it by Czech's Deputy Prime Minister. Watch this.
None of us in this room, including all of us on this panel, would choose to live under a regime that was so unaccountable that it could act with impunity the way that Putin does, except that's who Trump is modeling himself after.
Well, first, I think you really don't like him.
You know, that is absolutely true. But I really, not only do I not like him, I don't like him because of what he's doing to the United States and the world. And I think you should take a hard look at it if you think that there is something good that will come out of it.
What I think Trump is doing in America, I think it is reaction for something that, for some policies that really went too far from the regular people, too far from reality. So, you know, we saw the cancel culture. We saw the woke revolution.
He went on to say that there are only two genders, but it's interesting, Hillary. I mean, you listen to Marco Rubio's speech, he's just such a class act. Hillary Clinton there just can't handle a bit of truth that what we are seeing play out right now is partly a reaction to woke, far left policies just ruining America.
Well, absolutely. And where on earth was she when President Biden was letting in over 20 million illegals? How come she didn't have any umbrage then? It's rather sort of selective morality here. I think also she's trying to be very relevant in a time when she is definitely irrelevant. And sadly, she's contradicting herself because she was quoted back many years ago, long before President Trump was elected, even in his first term, as saying, we need somebody like Donald Trump to run for president who can't be bought. And she's actually on record as saying that. So it's amazing how she's now changed her mind just because he isn't of the correct political party. But I would like her to actually point to some of her points. Where is the success in what she's saying that he didn't do? In other words, she was there. She was at the helm. She could have made a difference when President Biden was doing these very things. So point to failures, not the successes, which she's taking umbrage at.
You're absolutely right. Let's just turn to this story that's gripping America. Donald Trump has now threatened the death penalty for the kidnappers of Nancy Guthrie if they fail to return her safely. Donald Trump told the New York Post that he would direct the Justice Department to pursue capital punishment if the 84-year-old mother of Savannah Guthrie is harmed. Now, this comes as Savannah Guthrie released another video saying that she is holding on to hope.
It's been 2 weeks since our mom was taken. We still have hope. And we still believe to whoever has her or knows where she is that it's never too late. And you're not lost or alone. And it is never too late to do the right thing.
Also, Hillary authorities have confirmed that the family has been cleared as suspects, but more than 2 weeks now. It's certainly getting challenging. What do you make of Donald Trump's words there?
Well, obviously, it's a ghastly situation. I don't know. I think that it's a federal issue whether somebody can receive the death penalty, whether he can interject himself into a certain state. But obviously, he's going to lean on the Justice Department. I think his sentiment is in the right place. I think what's very sad about this is when, Samantha's pleading with somebody to do the decent thing. It's never too late to do the decent thing. But somebody who isn't decent, that doesn't really appeal to them. Also, the one thing I found very strange, a lot of this seems like the Keystone Cops to me. you know that they found a lot of gloves, and those are sheriffs and those that are investigating the case have just been sort of dumping and dropping their gloves. That just seems rather strange. A lot about it is really baffling, I will say. Why they've done things sort of like, to use the American expression, ass backwards, things to do with the DNA, things to do with the camera, the Ring camera at the home, and lots of things that I know of time because they had to get the footage. But it's all, I think, a very strange case. A lot about it is beyond baffling, but at least President Trump has tried to do the right thing and been supportive, which is very good, because he's also reaching across the aisle, because it's not he's on a right-leaning network. I think he's done the right thing in this case. Very admirable.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. So many twists and turns in this case. We have to leave it there. Hilary Fordwich, President and founder of Strelmark, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, pleasure always, Gabriella. Thank you for having me.
Joining us now is Senior Research Fellow and Chief Economist at the Institute of Public Affairs, Adam Crichton. Adam, thank you so much for joining us. Since we last spoke, we of course have a new leader of the Liberal Party, Angus Taylor. He's expected to reveal his front bench today, and Sky News has confirmed that Jacinta Price and Andrew Hastie will be returning to the front bench. And as we've heard from Angus Taylor so far, he's flagged tougher immigration policies and, to quote him, to shut the door to people that want to bring hate and violence. We're going to, of course, get into the immigration debate in a moment. But Adam, first of all, can I get your thoughts on the new leadership? Because as well as getting the right people front and centre, unifying the party, putting out some strong policies, he's up against the rise of One Nation, and he's trying to win back support there. And that's going to be very tough to earn back the trust of voters who've abandoned the Liberal Party.
Yeah, certainly that is true. Look, I think it's a positive development for the Liberal Party. Of course, the leadership under Susan Lee was not going well. I think that's pretty clear, regardless of what you might think of Susan Lee. I think the challenge now for the Liberals and for Angus Taylor is to get policies out there. I mean, I think it's right, actually, that One Nation has more detailed policies on its website than the Liberal Party does. And of course, on the immigration policy, they've been consistent for many, many years. And the struggle I think the Liberals have there is they don't have a great deal of credibility on that policy, because of course they've overseen largely the immigration levels that we have, along with the Labor Party. But there's promising signs. That Sky News poll, I think, showed a small fall in One Nation's primary support, a small increase in the Liberal Party's support. That could continue. I think it's all going to depend on the next few weeks on whether the electorate, and let's be frank, probably a third of the electorate don't know who Angus Taylor is yet. I must say, they all know who Pauline Hanson is. So there's a recognition issue there. But I think so far, anyway, it's only been a few days, but he's been on the front foot. So has Jane Hume. They've been out there. I think that's a good thing. It's a fresh face. Let's just wait and see how it pans out.
Yeah, certainly the first step, I would say, at turning the party around. Sky News revealed the migration policy that was developed under Susan Lee but was not released, and that would limit visas from more than a dozen countries where terrorist groups are in control, including Afghanistan, Algeria, Egypt, Libya, Palestine, Philippines, Somalia, just to name a few. Adam, what are your thoughts around this policy? Not that it was revealed.
Look, I think it's it's a step in the right direction. Actually, somewhat laughably, the first thing I thought was Donald Trump's famous Muslim ban immigration policy of many years ago. You might remember that. That was very controversial. But this kind of has similarities a little bit. It's not called that, but I think most of those countries that you just rattled off are certainly Muslim countries. It's not the entirety of the population from those countries, as I understand it, just certain regions. I think it's reasonable, especially in the wake of the tragedy of Bondi. I think people want to see greater quality of migration coming to Australia. They don't want to see people here where statistically there's a higher probability that they're not going to enmesh and gel with the Australian community. But the problem with the policy I see is that it's not really about numbers. I mean, I imagine that the sheer numbers of people coming from those places are pretty low, and I think the overarching anger about migration is the level. I think just the sheer quantity. I know it's been falling. Labor keeps saying it's falling from 500,000 to 300,000, which is the latest figure. But 300,000 is still a lot. And even the budget forecasts of 220, 230,000, these are still huge figures compared to any other Western country. Probably, I would say, more proportionately than any other developed country in the world. So they're still very high. Let's say it goes back to 250. That's still double what it was in the early 90s. It's roughly triple what it was in the 80s under Hawke and Keating. So these are very high levels. Do the Australian community want those levels? It looks like at the moment they don't.
You're absolutely right. And just looking at those levels, of course, this plays into our housing crisis, the cost of living, the number of hospital beds being filled up. You've written about the economic impact and how it's becoming severe now with supercharging rents. Also how 10% of Australia's population is in an economically highly disadvantaged position after this influx of 1.2 million immigrants since 2022. Can you just explain that for us?
Yeah, sure. Look, that was my column last Friday, and I started it by referring back to Queensland, where in the late 19th century we imported, as largely more or less slave labour, or at least indentured servants, we imported islanders who worked on the farms, the sugar plantations, and at one point they were about 10% of the state's population. Now, in 1901 we sent them all home, largely all of them, and then I realised now, you know, fast forward 120 years, we've still got 10% of the Australian population this time, the whole country, more than 2 million people who are in similar, obviously not as bad, but similar situation. They don't have the same rights as Australian workers. They can be certainly taken advantage of by employers who know that they can dob them into authorities if they're working too many hours, or if, you know, they can force them to accept cash work. And I'm sure that goes on a great deal. And I pointed out that this 10%, just like back in Queensland all those years ago, this actually benefits the wealthy. The wealthy Queensland farmers did not want this labour to be sent home. And just like now, I think the inner city wealthy voters want their cheap Uber rides, they want their cheap restaurants, they want their cheap cleaners and nannies and so forth. The same sort of economic arguments are at play again. And for lower income native-born Australians, the competition for low-skilled jobs is huge. Of course, it's supercharging rents, cost of housing is through the roof. So I think the housing issue and the immigration issue really can't be separated. And so far, I'd have to say, you know, I think Angus is a bit weak, I'd probably say, on that. He's just talking about supply. Everyone likes talking about supply. It's the hand-wavy, easy answer. But, you know, Labor's already trying to get supply up and it can't. The reality is you just can't build houses very quickly. It's just hard to do. You need the workers. They've got to be, you know, they have to be zoned correctly. So I think just talking about supply is not going to do it. I think you need to cut the level of immigrants.
No, absolutely. Look, Jim Chalmers, he's rejected Angus Taylor's offer to work on a bipartisan approach to rein in government spending. Jim Chalmers has rejected Angus Taylor's offer to work on a bipartisan approach to rein in government spending. Taylor wrote to the Prime Minister arguing that the budget repair task was just too big for politics as usual, but Jim Chalmers immediately dismissed the proposal, labelling it as a political stunt. You know, it might have been, but the federal spending has been forecast to exceed $1 trillion in the near future, Adam.
Yeah, look, it's extraordinary. I mean, I spent a few years in Washington and I came back and federal spending had gone from something like $500 billion a year to $750 billion. I mean, that is just eye-popping, and the growth rates are still extraordinary. I mean, the last few years, more or less, have been the fastest growth outside COVID since the Whitlam government in the 70s, and it's a serious problem. It's fueling inflation, as you know, 3.8% inflation. It's rising. There's budget deficits as far as the eye can see, even though tax revenues are rising extremely quickly every year. So spending is certainly out of control. And just back to One Nation briefly, they do actually have policies on their website, as I understand it, that would significantly cut spending, such as scrapping all of the associated climate change subsidies and departments, which, at least on the IPA's calculation, is more than $10 billion a year now. So that's a lot of money. There's various agencies that can be scrapped, but the coalition hasn't actually said yet how it would cut spending, and it's difficult as soon as you talk about, say, the NDIS, which is out of control, as you know, soon to cost more than the military. You get accused of, you know, of treating the disabled poorly. So it's very hard politics, but it has to be faced up to.
Yeah, it certainly does. I want to turn to what's happening in the United States. Interestingly, Stephen A. Smith, he appears to be floating the idea of a presidential run. The broadcaster, political commentator, has said that he's giving strong consideration to a 2028 campaign. Here he is with Robert Costa on CBS News Sunday Morning.
Would you run as a Democrat?
Yeah, because I couldn't see myself running as a member of the GOP. I'm a fiscal conservative. I can't stand high taxes, but I'm a social liberal. in the same breath because I believe in living and let live. I pay attention to the desolate and the disenfranchised. Yes, I like strong borders. That's absolutely true. We never needed open borders, but we don't need it to be completely closed either. We're a gorgeous mosaic.
Sounds like you're getting a stump speech ready, Stephen.
No, there's no stump speech, but I can give it.
Could you be competitive in a Democratic primary? Some big names might run. Gavin Newsom, the California governor, among many others.
I respect all of them in terms of their intellect, in terms of where their heart lies, in terms of the service that they want to provide to this country.
It's interesting. He was also asked about if he was going to run, would he be worried about racism? And he said no. Listen to his answer.
Do you worry about racism if he ran for president?
No. I know it exists. I know that you can't escape it, but I do not believe it is as prevalent as some on the left would like us to believe. I do believe a vast majority of Americans judge you on the content of your individual character rather than the color of your skin.
Yeah, Adam, I certainly agree with that. What do you make of what he had to say?
Well, certainly he's right there. I think the so-called intelligentsia, media class obsess about racism in America as much in Australia, but it is actually far less prevalent. I think he's right there. But look, I think he'd be a very formidable Democratic candidate, and I think Republicans should be concerned. He's basically a centrist. I mean, I think his trouble is going to be winning over the Democrat extremists in the party. He's not left-wing enough. He's not extreme enough. But I think in terms of the wider American electorate, he would be very competitive, I think. Those other names you mentioned, Gavin Newsom, I think he's just very tainted by the basket case in some respects that California has become. And I think he'd be an easy target for a future Republican candidate.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what plays out. Senior Research Fellow and Chief Economist at the Institute of Public Affairs, Adam Crichton, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Gab.
Joining us now is News Corp columnist Angela Mollard. Angela, great to see you.
Good to see you too.
You've written a piece blasting Macron's government, and it's absolutely brilliant. Of course, the French government has sent a letter to every 29-year-old in the country reminding them not to forget to have babies, which is coming from Macron's government. Emmanuel Macron, as we know, is a deeply unpopular president. He's never had children himself. He's, of course, married to Brigitte Macron, and we all know how weird that relationship is. He was a 15-year-old schoolboy when he met Brigitte, who was 39 at the time. Very creepy. So Macron's government has sent this letter to 29-year-olds. I don't think they need advice from him or his government. Of course, under his government, housing is unaffordable, cost of living is under control, immigration's out of control there as well, making the conditions so much harder for young people to start a family.
Absolutely, just the same as it is here. And this is why I tackled this subject, because the kind of disconnect between governments and the populace, as you say, this is a man who hasn't had children of his own. I even make the point that he probably wasn't paying attention in biology, because I think what's happening with humans at the moment is what happens with kangaroos. When there's a problem in the environment, there's not enough water, they stop having babies. It's called embryonic diapause, and it's just a biological condition. Like, he should know that that's what's actually happening in the human world at the moment, that people aren't having babies because multiple reasons. They've been gaslit about the environment, about how scary it is, and that they can't bring children into it. They can't afford houses. You know, there's not even the village anymore because parents and there's all that family estrangement. I just thought it was a really interesting way of going about it. Talk to 20-year-olds, which I then did. And, you know, a young 20-year-old, 24, 25, he made the point, look, this is just Macron wanting to bolster the population because immigration's become so unpopular that they actually, for productivity purposes, and of course we need to stimulate the birth rate. Ours is actually lower than France's, to ensure that we do have people to do the work in the future, but not the way to go about it.
No, so instead of fixing the country and making conditions easier so people can afford to start
housing,
a family, he sent a letter, and that is suddenly going to fix the problem. But as you say, Australia's birth rate is worryingly low. It's lower than France's. So Australia's birth rate is at 1.48 children per woman. France is 1.56. The decline, it's just going in one direction. If you look at other parts of the world, there are certainly other incentives being offered to try and turn the birth rate around. Hungary, for example, has implemented pretty big pro-family policies, such as income tax exemption for women who have 4 children or more. So I suppose the question would also be, what should Australia be considering? Should Australia be considering some pretty radical policies to make the conditions easier for young people?
Well, we look at the Howard baby bonus, and all that money was basically spent on what were then new plasma TVs. And, you know, the effectiveness of that certainly hasn't continued through. I think you need to talk to women and men about the provisions like working from home. Like if you work from home, it makes it easier. Better housing policies. Look, we're getting a step in those directions, but it's not bringing down prices. It's not increasing availability. It's about talking to people. We also need to talk to young men who are having vasectomies in huge numbers. Anecdotally, I know at least 2 men who are 31, 32 who have had vasectomies, and the reason being is that they don't want children. So we need to change the narrative. And I also wonder to what extent my generation, the first generation who had it all, how much we've given a message of how dispiriting it is to try and juggle your career and juggle having children. You know, it's a narrative that we haven't transmitted the joy that comes from having children. And so I'm really careful with my daughters, 25 and 22, and making sure that I tell them how much I love being their parent, how much richness it's brought to my life. And I don't think we're doing that.
Also, another factor in this is some of the messaging we're getting from woke culture. You know, Vogue published an opinion piece, I should say, last year with the headline, "Is having a boyfriend embarrassing now?" Look, my takeaway from that was that this is just one example of a lot of messaging that the future is female, men is trash, kind of stay single. And that's absolutely fine if that's your choice. But if you're kind of constantly getting this messaging, do you think that has an impact? I think it really has an impact. If you're a young woman and you're seeing that it's really uncool to have a boyfriend or it's embarrassing, yes, I like from the strengthening of a woman's point about, yes, have agency around your finance, have agency in your workplace, have agency with your family. But there's a lot of women that actually do want to have children. And if they're getting the message that coupled in is somehow kind of old, boring, a bit kind of out of step, then that's going to actually impact on them treating their partners the right way, as well as showcasing their pride in having a partnership. Look, I'm all for everyone doing what they want in terms of their, in terms of whether they partner or not. But let's not discourage them purely because of the lens through which we're seeing it is somehow an embarrassment. It's not. It's actually, you know, partnership is one of them important psychologically and, you know, and physically. Our health is better if we're partnered. So I think we should, we should be countering that as well. Yeah, we should be countering that narrative that just seems to be getting pushed, you know, so much. Let's move on to royal news, because there are, of course, now growing calls for the former Prince, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor's time as trade envoy to be investigated for possible corruption. This is after these newly released Epstein files accused the former Prince of forwarding government documents to Jeffrey Epstein. Angela, can you bring us up to speed on what
so of course the focus up to date has been on Andrew and what he did with young women in America. Now the focus has turned because, of course, these Epstein's files, it's just like you go deeper and deeper. There's just layers of sediment in this. And so the new revelations have been that, of course, he became a trade envoy after he left the Navy. He was appointed by the Tony Blair government, and this was his role, despite the fact the King didn't want him to do it. What we're seeing now is allegations and coming through the Epstein files that he was actually sharing this privileged information, information around itineraries, business deals with Epstein, things that could have had an impact on national security. Now, while the British police have not yet confirmed that they are going to launch a criminal investigation, they're certainly looking into it. The implications of this, of course, is that if he is charged for misconduct in public office, that could potentially come with a prison sentence. Wow. So huge. There's still pressure on him from America, though, for him to speak to Congress. And I think that's going to get stronger because the King, of course, is visiting the US for a state visit in April. William is going there in July for the bicentenary celebrations. So when they are in America, that pressure, because that's of course where most of Epstein's victims live, is going to be enormous. So how the palace handles this, there's still a lot to run on the story.
Absolutely. Now, Princess Catherine and Prince William, they've shared a new photograph to mark Valentine's Day. They were both beaming well in the countryside, and certainly a gorgeous photo that has been posted of the future King and Queen. There we go. I don't know if we have that, but we'll try and get it up at some point. Also reports that they've never been closer and have become especially close after Princess Catherine's cancer diagnosis.
I think this is very, the notion of them being close is really believable, and there's so many things around the royal family that isn't. The reason being that they have gone inwards. There is so much muck happening on the outside of the royal family. I mean, Prince William's just been in Saudi Arabia. He didn't get a lot of coverage for that because of the Andrew problem. What they have to do with their family is be incredibly solid and secure as a unit of 5 for the future of the monarchy. So in the past, we didn't see things like these Valentine's Day photographs, but now I think they're wanting to showcase how close they are, how important they are for the stability of the monarchy, how tight-knit their 3 children are, and so we're not going to see things that happened with William and Harry among their children. They're very much focusing. You know, William's going to inherit this monarchy at potentially the worst time in history, when faith and trust in that institution has been completely smashed, and so showing things where there's togetherness, cohesion, love, service is really important.
It's interesting because unlike the advice from Vogue about not putting your relationship on Instagram, the royals are doing it, and so are the Beckhams. Harper Beckham has said that her father, David, is her first and always Valentine, as she posted tributes to her parents on Valentine's Day. David reposted the photo to Instagram, his Instagram stories, saying, "I'm not crying, honestly." So Harper's the Beckham's youngest child. It's interesting. This is all playing out very publicly, don't you think?
It really is, because I thought the kids would go quiet. They've always, I love the fact that Harper, who's just got on Instagram and may end up being chucked off it, because Britain is, of course, now discussing a social media policy.
She wouldn't be allowed it here.
No, she definitely
should find a way around it.
Yeah. But look, she's posting this, and she also posted pictures of her 3 brothers, including Brooklyn, and we know the fallout there. I think, look, it's really interesting in terms of media dynamics, isn't it? They are a brand in and of themselves. They are a family, but they're also how they're seen in the world. And I think, it's very much family first. The massive rupture with Brooklyn Beckham has so impacted on Victoria and David, not just as parents, but in the brand as the Beckham brand. I think the kids, look, to be honest, Harper adored Brooklyn. They haven't had contact because of the split in the family. I think she's just a little sister at the end of the day, wanting the attentions of her big brother.
Yeah, fair enough. Angela Mollard, thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks.
That is Power Hour. Thank you for your company. We'll see you tomorrow. Make sure you subscribe to Sky News Australia on YouTube.